Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to the Friday, April 14th, 2017 edition of VR News. Sadly not a gaming night VR Friday, but it is the last episode filmed in the beige draped express here behind me. Tomorrow, back in the man cave, can't wait. Also about 4 days away from being able to share some of the stuff that I've been talking about. Can't wait. We'll get into that on Tuesday's episode. Also wanted to just do a quick shout out for Nathie, who runs a VR YouTube channel as well. He's just crossed 200,000 subscribers, showing very much that, it's not a niche thing. It's not going anywhere. It's going to be around, and it's only going to grow larger. Well done, Nathie. Well done. All right. Let's start with a story that had me doing a double take, and one that, had it come out 2 weeks ago, I would have chalked up as an April Fool's joke. However, it is not. It concerns Microsoft and Sony. You immediately begin to think, a competitive device? What are they saying about each other? But it's actually stranger. It has to do with an interview. Phil Spencer, he of Xbox fame, who we talked about a few days ago, speaking to industry game developer website veterans Gamasutra, and he mentioned that they had invited Sony team over to see the HoloLens and the HoloLens facility. Weirder, Sony accepted and then reciprocated and had Microsoft over to view their virtual reality facility. Now, we've talked about the inclusiveness of VR, even though there's examples to the contrary. It's nice to see an example where they are being inclusive. And even if it's just a one-time olive branch, it's still pretty cool to hear about. Next story, VR First, who we also talked about a few days ago. They are the group that Crytek incubated and then kind of set out upon the world. They are now fully independent, working in universities for virtual reality labs, etc. And FutureMark, of course, the group behind the mainstream PC gaming benchmark tool, 3D Mark. Well, they've got an alliance of sorts where they want to jointly develop new VR standards. What they don't say in the article or either team is how this fits in with what the Kronos group is trying to achieve. They, of course, the group behind developing open VR standards. Maybe they want to jointly develop these and then present them with the group, or it's some kind of weird different alliance that they have. Either way, it's a little strange and definitely a story to follow over the upcoming months, because it's definitely a love-in of sorts. Here's what they had to say about each other. So VR First had this to say about FutureMark. FutureMark's extensive benchmarking experience and independent voice will be invaluable in our mission to democratize VR innovation, set industry standards, and create a global VR knowledge base. Now, that's coming from VR First co-founder Farhan Ozkan. And then FutureMark had this to say about VR First. In a short time, VR First has made impressive progress in bringing together industry partners, creators, and educators to deliver real results. The lack of consistent standards for VR has been widely discussed over the last 12 months. I look forward to working with the VR First members to address this important issue. And that statement made by FutureMark's Director of Engineering, Yanni Yoki. So yeah, definitely some cooperation between these two. Ultimately, what will happen with these standards, like I said, and how that ties in or does it with the Kronos group, time will tell. We'll have to wait and see. Next news story, Oculus filed a patent yesterday, or rather Facebook did, on behalf of the Oculus group, for what Upload VR feels may be the successor to the Oculus Touch controller. It's a glove of sorts. Well, the trademark was filed, but I'm not sure I agree with Upload VR that this will be a controller that's its successor to the Touch. I think it's meant more as something alongside in an attempt to diversify their VR offerings. And I'll get into that in a second. So The title of the patent was Optical Hand Tracking in Virtual Reality Systems. And it describes a glove, and if you read the description, they're basically describing the Constellation tracking system that the Rift uses. So that much is clear, it's using the same tracking system. Again, what we don't know is it meant as a successor or something different? The reason I think it's something different and more just an alongside peripheral is if you look at the competition, if you look at Sony, they're diversifying in the sense that they're looking at exploring commercial options, VR arcades in Japan, etc. HTC Vive already doing that and getting into non-virtual reality areas. Oculus was the only straggler in that sense. They weren't doing that. So what I think is that this tracked glove patent is for a technology that's going to benefit not gaming, but other areas that we've talked about, whether it's medical, education, who knows. But I think it's their attempt to diversify. Of course, the third option, which is none of the above, but I'd love to hear from you guys. Let me know what you think. Do you think it's going to be a successor, something alongside an attempt to diversify, or something else entirely? Let me know in the comments below. All right, mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. It is now underway, the Virtual Reality LA Expo, on today through to tomorrow, and has some pretty cool exhibited products. There is the Ultra Haptics device. We looked at this several months ago, which uses ultrasound waves to create haptic feedback. And then, of course, Mindride's Airflow. Kind of took a sneak peek at that before, got some more information, but we'll do that in a couple of news stories. We'll revisit that. And some pretty cool presentations. So if there's any of you that are down there in LA for this expo, love to hear from you guys, get a sense of what the attendance was like, what you were able to see, and kind of the atmosphere of the place. Would love to hear from you. Next story, social app Pluto VR raises an additional $13.9 million in what they say is an effort to expand their communication efforts. Now, Pluto VR, like I said, it's a social app, but where their offering differs, and the startup is a company by the same name as the app, Pluto VR, they are not just creating a full-blown VR application, it's more of an overlay. So you and your buddies may be in a VR game or a VR experience. You launch Pluto VR as an overlay. So you and your avatar and their avatars just appear over top of that game or experience. So I can see some cool potential for that. I can also see that getting in the way and creating a bit of a gong show, but we'll have to evaluate that when it's actually released. Again, that's Pluto VR. Next up, Dragon Ball Z VR. Now, this one, not one that I caught the first time around. As a Gen Xer, I missed this anime when it came out. I did, however, 10 years later, watch it with my daughter. It was kind of a thing we watched together, so I've got some nostalgia for it for that sense, even if it's not in my top anime by any means, right? But she used to love to do the Kamehameha move, and that apparently is what you can do with this mobile VR app. They show it in about a 40-second commercial. There's a couple of kids, and what I think is one of the kids' dad or uncle goes into a room, comes back out, and mimics exactly what they were doing with that move, but with the VR device. Now, is it a full-blown game application? They didn't really get into that, and I didn't dig deeper, but I will after this to check that out. Either way, have a look at the video in the link in the description below, if that's of interest to you. Now, next story, one of Kent Bai's Voices of VR podcast. And this is an excellent series. Talked about it many times. Haven't talked about it for a while, but I liked this one because it involves Mindride's Airflow, which is the device a couple of stories back I said we would touch on again. Now, there's a video that shows how this device works. And flight for humans is something we've wanted to do probably as long as we've been humans. It's probably goes back to prehistory, certainly to the beginnings of history. You've got the Greeks with Icarus, right? where he's warned by his father Daedalus to not fly too close to the sun. You've got Chinese with rocket technology, and there's, hot air balloons. There's always been attempts by us to get in the air, and we actually can do that now. But we can't do it like a bird. Well, sort of. There's suits out there where you can go at, very fast speeds, but it's more gliding, right? This application/device emulates actual flying. So you're strung up in this device. There's several straps. You're hanging in a flying Superman position, the HMD on your head, and what looks like some type of fan device blowing air, some kind of form of haptic feedback, while you fly through obstacles and beautiful, amazing terrain via the app that's tied into this. They even had a fella, because you're probably thinking, yeah, you're not going to ever tie yourself to that Epix. Well, I would. There was a girthy individual, probably about my size. His gut was a-hanging, and he was strapped in tight. So definitely something Exidy and myself could probably strap into to experience. So there. Next up, and the last story. Really cool, nerdy, geeky point of view. For me, hopefully for some of you, because of the subject matter. Now, person behind this application, his name's Matt Collishaw. And what he's done is recreated entirely in virtual reality an exhibition that took place in 1839. And he's doing this as a modern exhibition that museum goers would use a virtual reality HMD to experience. So let's talk about this original exhibit that he's recreating and why it's so fascinating to me. Why it's so fascinating is it was the first exhibition to show the then very new technology of photography. And in fact, it was so primitive at that time, even though there had been steps, for at least 100 years before that, these were semi-permanent. In fact, none of the photographs from that original display are clear. They're all washed out now because they hadn't yet developed that permanent photography technology that they would start to develop over the next 5-10 years. Where it gets really interesting is, think about it, it's the first time in human history we could capture reality, right? In a sense, and I know it's a bit of a stretch, but not really. It was virtual reality. People could capture themselves, objects, children. In fact, there was a whole macabre thing going on in the Victorian era where people would have family portraits with just deceased children. They would literally prop them up and have everybody gather around and do a pose with them to remember them by. It looks terribly horrific now, but was perfectly acceptable back in Victorian times, right? So it was a way of capturing reality back then. We'd only painted each other and landscapes up to then. Just think about it. There's a photograph from the 1840s that shows a woman and a man. There's two of these that, are the oldest woman, oldest man ever, or oldest human to ever have been recorded by a photograph. Both were born in the 1700s. Think about that. Almost 400 years ago, 300 some odd years ago, and captured permanently, not via painting. To me, that is just too cool. And then, of course, radio, TV, and other ways of capturing reality. And then, of course, VR that we have today. So what I love about this exhibit is that it brings all of that full circle. Really freaking cool. Again, Matt Collishaw, he's the person behind it. The exhibition is called Thresholds. It's going to be at Somerset House in London, 11th of May through for 1 month and including to the 11th of June. And that's this year. So if you're there and photography's your thing, check it out. Let me know, and I am definitely envious that you get to check that out. All right, guys, that is it for today's episode. Like I said, tomorrow back in the man cave. Can't wait. Hope you guys had a great week and have a terrific weekend. As always, cheers, guys.